Hello everyone, this video presents an insight into George Ryga's The Ecstasy of Rita Joe, covering the author's background, main characters, plot summary, themes, structure, style, and the spirit of activism that runs throughout the play, which is presented by INDHUMATHI, PRIYADHARSHINI.SK and PRIYADHARSHINI.V. So without any delay, let's get into the video.
Before we move into the story, let's take a quick look at the author, George Ryga. He was born in 1932 in Alberta, Canada, into a poor immigrant family. Growing up with so many struggles made him very aware of issues like poverty and injustice. His writing style is both powerful and realistic. He often used poetic language but always kept his focus on social problems and the lives of ordinary people. The themes you'll often find in his works are social injustice, poverty, alienation, and the struggles of marginalized communities. His most famous play is The Ecstasy of Rita Joe, written in 1967. This was one of the first Canadian plays to truly bring Indigenous voices and their struggles to the stage. He also wrote Summerland and the Pontiac Papers, which deal with similar issues. George Ryga passed away in 1987, but his works are still remembered for their emotional power and for giving a voice to those who were often unheard in society. Now let's talk about the characters in The Ecstasy of Rita Joe and how they help us understand the story. Rita Joe. She is the central character, a young Indigenous woman who comes to the city hoping for freedom and new opportunities. At first, she is full of hope and dreams, however, she soon faces the harsh reality of discrimination. She is judged for her clothes, her language, and even her identity. Instead of receiving help, she faces blame from people in authority, like the police, the magistrate, and the social worker. Her character is truly tragic because all she wants is a simple life, yet she becomes a victim of racism, poverty, and exploitation. In the play David Joe, the father of Rita Joe. He represents the older Indigenous generation, deeply rooted in tradition and cultural values. David Joe is a symbol of wisdom, connection to the land, and respect for heritage. However, he struggles to guide his daughter in a modern world that does not accept their identity. His character reflects the pain of a father watching not only his child, but also his entire community, lose dignity and respect in the face of discrimination. Through David Joe, George Ryga shows the voice of tradition, struggling to survive in a society that pushes Indigenous people to the margins. Another important character is Jamie Paul, a young Indigenous man who embodies anger, rebellion, and resistance. Unlike Rita, who is gentle and innocent, Jamie reacts strongly to the discrimination and injustice faced by Indigenous people in the city. His anger reflects the frustration of an entire community pushed to the margins of society. Tragically, Jamie dies when he is shot by the police while trying to protect Rita. His death shows the harsh consequences of systemic injustice and highlights the vulnerability of those who fight against oppression. Next, there are other characters who mainly represent society's institutions rather than individual personalities. The magistrate stands for the justice system. Instead of protecting Rita Joe, he blames her for her situation, which shows how the law is often biased against Indigenous people. The priest in the play represents religion and moral authority. Instead of helping or guiding Rita Joe through her struggles, he largely ignores her real problems. Through his character, the play shows how religion and moral institutions can sometimes fail to address the actual needs of vulnerable people, highlighting the gap between moral ideals and reality. Miss Donahue is Rita Joe's school teacher and a white woman who struggles to understand her. When Rita was young, she found her a difficult student. Later, in court, Miss Donahue appears as a witness for Rita Joe. However, she doesn't really have a strong opinion about her and even believes that Rita is a prostitute. This shows how society often misunderstands and judges Indigenous people unfairly. The policemen in the play symbolize authority and power. But instead of keeping peace, they misuse their position. They harass and control Rita Joe, showing how those in power often exploit vulnerable people. Their actions highlight the injustice and discrimination faced by Indigenous communities. About The Ecstasy of Rita Joe. The Ecstasy of Rita Joe, 1967, written by Canadian playwright George Ryga, is a powerful two-act play that highlights the struggles of Indigenous peoples in Canada. Through fragmented tableaus instead of a linear plot, it tells the story of Rita Joe, a young indigenous woman who moves to the city seeking opportunity but instead faces systemic racism, poverty, and prejudice. First staged at the Vancouver Playhouse, the play became a landmark in Canadian theatre, later adapted into ballet and French performances. Ryga, the son of poor Ukrainian immigrants, rose from limited education to become a celebrated playwright, and this work remains his most significant contribution to literature and social awareness. Summary: the play begins with Rita Joe, a young indigenous woman, standing in a courtroom. She is accused of vagrancy and prostitution. The magistrate questions her, pretending to be fair, but in reality, his judgments are rooted in prejudice against indigenous people. Rita tries to defend herself, and while doing so, she recalls her life, the people she loved and the experiences that shaped her. She remembers her childhood with her father and sister, and her deep bond with Jamie Paul, a young man from her community. These memories contrast with her difficult life in the city, where she faces discrimination, poverty, and loneliness. The play moves back and forth between the courtroom, her memories, and even scenes that she herself did not witness, creating a fragmented but powerful picture of her struggle. At one point, the magistrate tells Rita to bring character witnesses to prove her worth. Yet when people, like her childhood teacher, appear, they fail to support her. Instead, their words reveal the racism and condescension that indigenous people constantly endure. In the end, Rita is sentenced to 30 days in prison. When she is released, Jamie tries to help her. They turn to Mr. Homer's shelter, but instead of safety, they are met with rejection and conflict. This leads to Rita's arrest once again. The magistrate then declares that Rita cannot be helped, essentially condemning her future and foreshadowing the tragedy to come. When Rita is freed again, everything spirals out of control. A group of murderers attacks them. Jamie dies trying to defend her, and Rita is raped and killed, a brutal reminder of the violence faced by indigenous women. The play closes with the joint funeral of Rita and Jamie. This ending leaves us with a haunting image: two young lives destroyed, not by their own choices, but by a society poisoned with racism, poverty, and injustice. Now, let's discuss the main theme of the story. First, the struggle of indigenous people. Rita Joe's story shows how a young woman, full of hope and dreams, faces constant discrimination simply because of her identity, culture, and background. Instead of receiving understanding, society judges her, and even those who are supposed to help, like the police, the magistrate, and the social worker, fail to support her. Moving on to social injustice. The play highlights how marginalized communities, especially indigenous people, are often pushed to the edges of society and blamed for problems they did not create. Through Rita Joe's experiences, Ryga demonstrates how poverty, racism, and cultural loss trap individuals in a cycle they cannot escape. Next, let's look at alienation and identity. Rita Joe struggles to find acceptance and dignity in a society that constantly rejects her. Her journey reflects the pain of losing one's culture and sense of belonging, which makes her experience even more tragic. Finally, poverty and cultural loss. The play shows how economic hardship and the erosion of indigenous culture make life even harder for Rita Joe and others like her. Through these themes, Ryga encourages the audience to reflect on fairness, equality, and compassion. Overall, the theme is both powerful and tragic, reminding us that understanding, empathy, and social justice are essential for creating a fair and just society.
Structure of the play. The structure of the play is very unusual and powerful. Instead of following a normal, straight-line story, Ryga uses a non-linear structure. The play moves between courtroom scenes and flashbacks. The courtroom represents the authority of society, cold, harsh, and judgmental. The flashbacks show Rita Joe's personal memories, warm, painful, and emotional. This back-and-forth movement between past and present shows how Rita Joe's life is shaped by both personal experiences and social systems. The play is also episodic, meaning it is made up of small, disconnected scenes. These short scenes feel like fragments of Rita Joe's broken life. This fragmented structure makes the audience feel her confusion and helplessness. Through this unique structure, Ryga makes the story more emotional and realistic. We see not just the events of her life, but how the system continuously traps her. Style of the play. The style of the Ecstasy of Rita Joe mixes realism and expressionism. Realism is seen in the courtroom scenes, police interrogations, and social situations. These show the reality of how indigenous people were treated. Expressionism is used in songs, music, and symbolic scenes. These elements express Rita Joe's inner feelings and the spiritual side of her culture. Ryga also uses poetic language and music to blend indigenous oral traditions with modern theatre. Sometimes, characters don't speak logically. Instead, their words sound like broken poetry, which shows emotion more than logic. The symbolism in the play is very strong. For example, the courtroom represents colonial authority. Rita Joe herself becomes a symbol of all indigenous women who suffer under discrimination. The style of the play therefore helps the audience to not only understand Rita Joe's story, but to feel her pain and anger deeply. Activism in the play. Beyond being a drama, this play is also an act of activism. It was written in 1967, the centennial year of Canada, a time when the country was celebrating progress and national pride. But George Ryga used this moment to expose the truth, that Indigenous people were still facing racism, poverty, and injustice. The play speaks out against racism and prejudice, police brutality, poverty and unemployment, loss of culture and identity. By showing Rita Joe's tragic life, Ryga criticizes how society fails Indigenous people. The play gave a public voice to those who were silenced and forgotten. This makes the Ecstasy of Rita Joe a landmark of political theatre in Canada. It shows that art and theatre can be used as tools for social awareness and change.